How's it going, everyone? Austin Honecker here. Yeah, it's been a while since I've made a video here on my YouTube channel. It's been about a couple months. I've had a lot going on with my mental health and such and such. But, I just wanted to come on here because I've been watching a wrestling documentary called Dark Side of the Ring. It's had 3 seasons, soon to be 4 seasons. Well, I just got done watching season 1 today. And season 1 had 6 episodes, season 2 had 10 episodes, season 3 had 14 episodes, and season 4 will have 10 episodes. But like I said, I've caught up on season 1 so far. And I'm going to give my review on Dark Side of the Ring season 1. So, here's my review. Episode 1 was called The Match Made in Heaven. And that episode was pretty much talking about the late great Macho Man Randy Savage and the late great Miss Elizabeth. It pretty much talked about Macho Man Randy Savage's stardom in wrestling coming from his father, the late great Angelo Poffo's promotion, International Championship Pro Wrestling, some shit like that. Talking about his start there and transitioning into WWE and finding success there. WWE, then WWF, finding success there, and then jumping ship to WCW and everything. And then it also talked about Miss Elizabeth's start in the business and the late great Angelo Poffo's promotion as an announcer, and then debuted in WWF as Macho Man Randy Savage's valet, and eventually going to WCW to be Macho Man Randy Savage's valet in WCW. Well, this episode pretty much was talking about the marriage between the late great Macho Man Randy Savage and the late great Miss Elizabeth. Talked about how when they got married, and talked about their marriage and how they had issues in their marriage, and how Macho Man Randy Savage was overprotective of Miss Elizabeth and would hover over her and control her and everything, and it talked about how Miss Elizabeth left Macho Man Randy Savage because of how overprotective and controlling he was and everything, and talked about how Macho Man Randy Savage went downhill after Miss Elizabeth left him and they got divorced. Well, they were divorced up until the point of, when they went to WCW. And, but they still worked together on screen. Well, Miss Elizabeth went into a love affair with Lex Luger, and they began a relationship, and Lex Luger was still married at the time, but they were having a love affair. And, it also covered Miss Elizabeth's passing in 2003. She passed away from a drug overdose. And Lex Luger was there when she died. And he called the EMTs and everything, and the EMTs tried to have him do CPR, but he was scared to death, and so the EMTs came and took her to the hospital and pronounced her dead. And they also covered it also covered Macho Man Randy Savage's passing in 2011. And but before I get into that, it also talked about how Macho Man Randy Savage married his high school sweetheart, Lynn Payne. And they were, but before I get into that, also, after Miss Elizabeth passed away, Macho Man Randy Savage was in an interview, and they were asking about the passing of Miss Elizabeth. Well, Macho Man Randy Savage sent his condolences to Miss Elizabeth's family and everything, and then now the death of Macho Man Randy Savage in 2011, what happened with that, Macho Man Randy Savage and his wife Lynn Payne were coming back they were out driving somewhere, and Macho Man Randy Savage took a heart attack behind the wheel of his car and wrecked into a tree. Totaled the car. Macho Man Randy Savage passed away, but Lynn, Macho Man Randy Savage's wife, she miraculously survived. And that episode was pretty much covering all that, but the talent and personnel, whatever, that were interviewed for that episode, there was Bruce Pritchard, Eric Bischoff, Lanny Poffo, the people that were interviewed for that episode were Lanny Poffo, Eric Bischoff, Bruce Pritchard, the Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart, Jake the Snake Roberts, Scott Hall, and that's all I recall with that. The great episode. Episode 2 was the Montreal Screwjob. Well, this episode talked about how the Montreal Screwjob came about because of the match between Bret the Hitman Hart versus the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series 1997. And it talked about how WWE was having Bret Hart drop the WWF title to Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series 1997 because Bret Hart was getting ready to jump ship to WCW. Now, before I get into all that, the beginning of the episode talked about Bret Hart's stardom and Stampede Wrestling, which was owned by his father, the late great Stu Hart, and everything, and they talked about that. And then now with the Screwjob, it talked about the Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series 1997. It talked about how that went about, with Bret Hart suspecting that he's going to be screwed over. But before that happened, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels got into a fist fight, and Bret Hart tried to apologize, but Shawn Michaels wouldn't oblige, and everything. And so what happened, Bret Hart got with Earl Hebner because Earl Hebner was the referee for the match. Bret Hart asked Earl Hebner not to screw him over. Earl Hebner promised, but Vince McMahon had Gerald Briscoe talk to Earl Hebner and told him to ring the bell as soon as Shawn Michaels put Bret Hart in the sharpshooter, or he was going to be fired. So Earl Hebner hated to do it, but when the match happened, Shawn Michaels locked in the sharpshooter. The ending to the match, Shawn Michaels locked in the sharpshooter on Bret Hart. Earl Hebner called for the bell. Well, after the match, Bret Hart was pissed, spit in Vince McMahon's face, done sign language of the WCW logo, WCW letters and everything, and then the WCW letters and everything. And then after it all happened, Bret the Hitman Hart, sucker punched Vince McMahon and left. And, well, Vince McMahon, Jim Cornette, and Vince Russo were in the booking committee, discussing ideas, and a big uproar between Jim Cornette and Vince Russo happened, and Vince Russo came up with that ending. But it also covered the storyline of the storyline feud between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels as well, leading up to the Montreal Screwjob. And yeah, that's pretty much how the Montreal Screwjob happened and everything as well. But the talent and personnel that were interviewed for this episode were Bruce Pritchard, Bret the wrestlers and personnel that were interviewed for this episode were Bret the Hitman Hart, Jim Cornette, Eric Bischoff, Vince Russo, Bruce Pritchard, Scott Hall, and Earl Hebner. That was a great episode as well. Episode 3 was The Killing of Bruiser Brody. Now, this episode pretty much covered the death of Bruiser Brody. Well, Bruiser Brody, he was known all over the world. World Class Championship Wrestling, All Japan Pro Wrestling, wrestling in Puerto Rico, pretty much promotions all over the world. And Bruiser Brody, he was a brutal son of a bitch. And it was hardcore all over with him. Now, he would legit shoot on his opponents in the ring. Now, this episode consisted of the death of the late great Bruiser Brody. And how it all happened, Jose Gonzalez, who was in Vader 1, they were in Puerto Rico. Bruiser Brody and Tony Atlas, Dutch Mantell, Jose Gonzalez, Carlos Colon, and a lot of the talent were in Puerto Rico for Carlos Colon's promotion. And Jose Gonzalez, he was pissed off because Bruiser Brody was straight up shooting on him in the match, and they had differences with each other because because Carlos Colon was the promoter and Jose Gonzalez was the booker. Well, Jose Gonzalez asked Bruiser Brody if he could talk to him in private in the showers. Bruiser Brody obliged. And Bruiser Brody went into the showers with Jose Gonzalez and everything. And so an argument ensued between Bruiser Brody and Jose Gonzalez took a big-ass knife and stabbed Bruiser Brody to death. Tony Atlas went in there, and because he heard Bruiser Brody breathing heavily, and Tony Atlas got Bruiser Brody out of there, called the EMTs. EMTs came, took Bruiser Brody to the hospital, and shortly after, he passed away. And it also covered, the news about it, and his wife, and, Bruiser Brody's widow and son coming to Puerto Rico, and getting the news about Bruiser Brody and the funeral and everything, and then, but before all this happened, it also covered the career of Bruiser Brody, the late great Bruiser Brody as well. And the talent and personnel that were interviewed for this episode were Mr. USA Tony Atlas, Dutch Mantell, David Manning, promoter of World Class Championship Wrestling, Abdullah the Butcher, Barbara Goodish, widow of the late great Bruiser Brody, and Jeff Goodish, son of the late great Bruiser Brody. That's all that I recall that was interviewed for that episode. And that was an awesome episode as well. That was a great episode. And that's pretty much what all that episode was, but it was a great episode nonetheless. It was an awesome, it was a great episode. Episode 4, it was the last of the Von Erichs. And the Von Erichs, that consisted of Fritz Von Erich, Kevin Von Erich, Kerry Von Erich, Mike Von Erich, David Von Erich, and Chris Von Erich. And this episode pretty much talked about the Von Erich stardom in professional wrestling and world-class championship wrestling and promotions worldwide, and well, it talked about their stardom in world-class championship wrestling, and it also covered the lives of the Von Erichs before their lives in professional wrestling and how Fritz Von Erich got his start, and all the boys, all his sons, would watch wrestling to see their father, the late great Fritz Von Erich, in action and everything. And it also covered about Fritz Von Erich and his wife Doris Von Erich, losing their youngest son Jackie at 6 years old because he got electrocuted and drowned in a puddle. Got electrocuted and drowned in a puddle. It also covered David Von Erich passing away from a drug overdose, Mike Von Erich passing away from a drug overdose, Chris Von Erich passing away from a gunshot to his head because of his depression from wrestling, from getting injured not wrestling again. It covered Kerry Von Erich passing away from a suicide due to a gunshot in the heart because his depression from getting injured from wrestling as well. And Kevin Von and Kevin, it also covered what Kevin Von Erich is doing nowadays because he's the only Von Erich left in the family. It also covered Fritz Von Erich's death and everything because Fritz Von Erich had heart and lung failure is what killed him. And I said the late great Fritz Von Erich, also the late great Mike Von Erich, late great David Von Erich, late great late great Kerry Von Erich, and also the late Chris Von Erich. It also covered about how that they made somebody that wasn't even in the family, Lance Von Erich, who wasn't even any relation to him, but wanted to keep the Von Erich name and everything. And it also covered about Kevin Von Erich going into a deep depression over losing his father and losing all 5 of his brothers. And Kevin Von Erich came close to committing suicide, but he changed his mind and decided to live his life and everything, and he ended up retiring from wrestling. And it also covered what he's doing nowadays with, training his sons, Ross Von Erich and Marshall Von Erich, into wrestling and spending time with his granddaughter and everything. So that's what that episode was about. But the talent, the wrestlers and personnel that were interviewed for that episode were Kevin Von Erich, Jim Cornette, David Manning, Dave Meltzer, Ross Von Erich, and Marshall Von Erich, sons of Kevin Von Erich, and Bruce Pritchard. That was a great episode. Episode 5 was The Mysterious Death of Gorgeous Gino. This episode pretty much covered the late great Gorgeous Gino Hernandez career in world-class championship wrestling and other promotions worldwide, and talked about how he was the most hated heel in professional wrestling and everything. How he was the most hated wrestler in professional wrestling because he was a heel and everything, and it also covered his death, of what happened, because where he went to clubs, where he went to bars and done drugs and drank all the time because he was hanging out with the wrong crowd, and talked about his and also got into his time with Jeannie Williams, who was Lady Blossom, the ex-wife of WWE Hall of Famer Stone Cold Steve Austin, and everything. And it also talked about how the late great Gorgeous Gino Hernandez passed away, and there was suspicions that it was a drug overdose, and there were suspicions that he was murdered. But the also the episode talked about, you know, his stardom in professional wrestling and his success in professional wrestling and everything, and but his death, he either knew something or he ripped someone off of their money or some shit, and he was paranoid he was paranoid to death and went out and everything, and next thing you know, he went back to he went to David Manning and asked for a gun, but David Manning wouldn't give it to him, so the late great gorgeous Gino Hernandez left and went into his condo, and all of a sudden he passed away. And so his booking agent, John Royal, came, then called his mother, the late great gorgeous Gino Hernandez's mother, and let her know about his death and everything, and talked about how his mother wanted answers for his death and everything because she suspected that he was murdered, and so they got John Royal, the booking agent of the late great gorgeous Gino Hernandez, on the phone, and one of the drug dealers that the late great gorgeous Gino Hernandez was with the night he passed away and everything, and they both told their side of the story and everything, and so it brought comfort to gorgeous Gino Hernandez's mother and everything. So that episode, that's what that was about and everything, and the wrestlers and personnel that were interviewed for that episode were Jake the Snake Roberts, Bruce Pritchard, David Manning, the talent and personnel that were interviewed for that episode. There was David Manning, Jake the Snake Roberts, Bruce Pritchard, Patrice Aguirre, mother of the late great gorgeous Gino Hernandez, Janice Wolfe, ex-wife of the late great gorgeous Gino Hernandez, and Lisha Gillespie, the daughter of the late great gorgeous Gino Hernandez. That's the only ones I recall that were interviewed for that episode. That was a great episode as well. And episode 6, which was the last episode of season 1, it was The Fabulous Moolah. And this episode pretty much covered the career and death of the late great Fabulous Moolah. It pretty much talked about how the Fabulous Moolah got into the professional wrestling business, and how she trained a bunch of women wrestlers, and how she started women wrestling and everything because she was idolized by Mildred Burke and everything, and then talked about how she supposedly made women that she was training prostitute for money and wouldn't train them or anything. And it also covered about the Fabulous Moolah's death too, and her funeral and everything. But there was some criticism about the Fabulous Moolah, and there was no criticism about the Fabulous Moolah. It was 50-50 and everything. And so the people, the talent and personnel and everything that were interviewed for this episode were Mary Austin, the daughter of the late great Fabulous Moolah, Wendy Richter, Selena Majors, Leilani Kai, Peggy Lee, Princess Victoria, Barbara Harsey, daughter of the late Sweet Georgia Brown, Michael McCoy, son of the late Sweet Georgia Brown, and Kevin McCoy, son of the late Sweet Georgia Brown. And you know, that was a great episode as well. All these episodes were off the chart in season 1. But, you know, season 1, that was back in 2019. You know, I was hesitant on watching Dark Side of the Ring at first, but I got to watching it. It's fucking awesome. Like, the first episode pretty much was talking about the late great Macho Man Randy Savage and the late great Miss Elizabeth. The second episode was talking about the Montreal Screw Job in WWE in 1997. The third episode was talking about the late great Bruiser Brody, which I forgot to add in that episode. Carlos Colon didn't want to get involved, was suspected to be involved in that as well too. But anyway, like I said, episode 3 was talking about the late great Bruiser Brody. Episode 4 was talking about the Von Erich family, who are Fritz, Kevin, Carrie, Mike, David, and Chris Von Erich. Episode 5 was talking about the late great gorgeous Gino Hernandez, and episode 6 was talking about the late great Fabulous Moolah. So like I said, all 6 episodes of season 1 were awesome. I really enjoyed them. I'll be catching up with season 2 and season 3 whenever I can, because, you know, I work Monday through Friday and occasionally on Saturday, but I'm usually off every Saturday and Sunday. So whenever I get the chance, I'll be catching up on season 2 and season 3 before season 4 starts in late May. So anyway, I just wanted to come on here for a while and give my review for Dark Side of the Ring season 1. All 6 episodes were awesome from start to finish. They're really interesting because Dark Side of the Ring, it gives you the ins and outs of professional wrestling. It's fucking interesting because I am a big time professional wrestling fan, and I'm involved in the indies at the moment, you know, doing commentary, I'm a commentator, a backstage analyst, and a ring announcer for indie wrestling promotions. So to watch Dark Side of the Ring, to learn about the ins and outs of professional wrestling, it's fucking interesting. I love it. But anyway, like I said, I just wanted to come on here for a while and give my review for Dark Side of the Ring season 1. All 6 episodes were awesome from start to finish. I really enjoyed them. And I'll be looking forward to catching up with season 2 and season 3. Season 2 and season 3 here soon. And I'll be watching season 4 as well. So with that being said, my name is Austin Honecker, and I will catch your fucking ass down the goddamn road. Peace out.